We're almost in a sort of revivalist period for horror movies. We have been since like 2016, at least in terms of box office performance and major studio attention. But it's not all plain sailing just yet. There are still plenty of times that we've got our hopes up looking at something that has great potential, only to head out to see it and find that it's just a flaming garbage fire. It's always good advice to expect the worst, so whatever happens, you won't be disappointed, especially when it comes to being a fan of horror movies. I'm Amy from What Culture, and here are 9 promising horror movies that totally sucked. 9. The Veil. Coming from the director that brought us State of Grace and Heaven's Prisoners, and starring Jessica Alba in the cast for some reason, if nothing else, we thought that The Veil could be quite fun. It could maybe be one of the horrors that you watch once in an evening, you have a nice, easy, fun time, and then you just never think about it again. Disappointingly though, the film would provide no such light enjoyment. The Veil, in fact, was so disappointing that Blumhouse let it slip out unnoticed on DVD. The film takes place 25 years after a mass suicide at the Heaven's Veil cult. The sole survivor of the incident returns to the site with a camera crew, who discover videotapes dating back to 1985. So at its core, it's another horror movie about watching people watch tapes, and that's about as interesting as it sounds. But cults are usually interesting, they give you lots to work with, especially with their charismatic leaders. However, the film's cult head Jim Jacobs, I wonder who that's based on, doesn't live up to his potential. In fact, it's difficult to take the guy seriously when the person he reminds you of most is Val Kilmer in True Romance. Eccentric rather than frightening, he's one of several missteps the film makes with what should have been an easy premise to deliver on. 8. The Darkness. You wouldn't expect Greg McLean, who also made Wolf Creek, to take the reins on a PG-13 horror movie, and sure enough, the critics wondered if he was phoning this one in. Originally titled 6 Miranda Drive, The Darkness stars Kevin Bacon and Rhoda Mitchell as a couple who return home from a Grand Canyon vacation to find their lives invaded by a supernatural presence. That'll cause you so much stress you may as well just go back on holiday straight after. Needless to say, the film was incredibly disappointing. One critic called the movie pretty much a total bust. Apparently it isn't scary, it isn't exciting, and it plods along at such a snail's pace that even though it clocks in at just over 90 minutes, it plays like it runs at least twice that. The cast is good, and McLean does what he can with the material, as it's his first film that he didn't write himself, but the results are thin and predictable at best, and an absolute waste of your time at worst. 7. Knock Knock. Knock Knock promises a great deal. It's a remake of a 70s home invasion thriller directed by Eli Roth and starring Keanu Reeves. But despite the men's name value, Lionsgate still sent the movie out to on demand. One reason for that might be that it's neither your typical Roth movie nor your typical Keanu fare. The film does occasionally get nasty, but it's nothing compared to what we usually expect from Roth, stuff like Hostel or The Green Inferno. The biggest problem is Keanu himself, who simply doesn't register as a happily married businessman being tortured by 2 girls whilst his wife and daughter are away. I know that's a very specific thing to fit, but you'll just have to take my word for it. Keanu is a great actor and he's had plenty of iconic roles, but this one just wasn't for him. In Knock Knock, he's perfectly game as a family man, but you can't help but think he's being stifled. 6. The Lazarus Effect. Coming out in 2015, The Lazarus Effect opened to a decent box office and pleasant reviews, paving the way for us to get quite excited for what we thought could be a good movie. Unfortunately though, as quickly as the movie sets itself up, it also goes off the rails, and it never quite recovers. The problem is that the film thinks it's a modern Frankenstein, but even by the standards of PG-13 horror, it's pretty creaky and pedestrian. Like we've seen a million times before, the movie sees a team of researchers find a way to bring the dead back to life. As is always the case, they've only done it on animals and they've never done it on humans. So if you were to guess the plot point that comes next is that one of them accidentally dies and has to be brought back to life, and they're probably a romantic interest of some kind, you'd be right. The lead researcher's girlfriend dies in an accident, and then when they revive her, she returns as some sort of monster. It's nothing new, it's not particularly scary, and honestly it just blends into a sea of identical movies. 5. Maggie. Arnold Schwarzenegger in a zombie movie, you say? Sign us up! I bet it's loaded with action, explosions, and a bit where Arnie shoots his zombie wife and delivers a really cool line. Oh, no? Oh, my bad. Unfortunately, Maggie features none of this. Instead, it consists of Arnie moping around whilst his daughter slowly succumbs to infection after being bitten. It's kind of like a zombie movie for people who don't enjoy zombie movies, but not in a good way. Back in the 90s, Arnie was being mooted as a possible lead in the long-gestating remake of I Am Legend, and if he'd done that movie instead of End of Days, then he would have been taking on zombies with machine guns, a very different approach from the version that eventually starred Will Smith. Maggie's lack of firepower turns out to be a bad idea, because if ever a movie needed endless sequences of the Austrian oak mowing down hordes of flesh eaters, it's this one. 4. The Gallows. It's yet another found footage offering from Blumhouse, and by now you know the drill. Dull characters run around screaming, the jump scares are routine, and a sense of deja vu hangs over the whole movie. In 1993, a student dies in a hanging stunt gone wrong during the production of a play called The Gallows. 20 years later, the school attempts to put on the play again to mark the anniversary of the accident, for some reason, as if that's even remotely tasteful. So yeah, if you've seen any horror movie ever before, you know that nothing can go wrong with that. It's led by the usual bunch of annoying interchangeable teens who document everything with cameras, including the sudden arrival of a barely glimpsed assailant who wields a noose. There's some funny goings on, we're talking bizarre telephone calls, assaults by an unseen force, etc. But the movie never really cranks it up to full-on terror or delivers a particularly scary experience. Looking at the trailer, we may have expected better, but at that point, is that just our fault? 3. Cabin Fever. Eli Roth's 2002 original is a wild and crazy homage to 70s exploitation cinema, whose narrative often seemed to go off in several directions at once, packing in horror, comedy, splatter, and surrealism. In the right hands, a remake could really be something. Alas, Cabin Fever 2016 not only failed to bring anything new to the party, but it's so flat and dispiriting that you'll be convinced you're watching a cheap knockoff of The Asylum. Characters you couldn't care less about wander through a narrative that's been nipped and tucked beyond belief. And in the process, the filmmakers have somehow excised whatever charm the original possessed. Despite working from the same script, with enough changes to make it contemporary of course, the filmmakers have made a movie whose soullessness will numb the unprepared viewer. Cabin Fever is a classic, and it was such a shame to see it be done so dirty. 2. Cell. The kind of dour movie that might just put you off Stephen King adaptations for life, Cell reunites John Cusack and Samuel L. Jackson, but it's a definite step down from their last collaboration in 1408. The plot is typical King. When a mysterious cell phone signal transforms the users into bloodthirsty creatures, a group of survivors band together in New England and eventually encounter a villain known as the Raggedy Man. Unfortunately, neither actor looks at home in this movie, which, by the way, plays out like standard issue cable fare before falling apart altogether in the final 20 minutes. And if that doesn't sound bad enough, be aware that the director is Todd Williams, the man who brought us Paranormal Activity 2. Taking itself seriously at every turn, Cell lets its plot unfold without any irony or surprises. Eli Roth was reportedly in the running to direct but dropped out due to creative differences, and it's not difficult to see why. If ever a movie could have used his sense of deranged fun, it's this one. 1. Blair Witch. Blair Witch comes from the Paranormal Activity school of sequels. It takes all the gimmicks from the first film, adds a new cast, and pretends it's a new movie. It's a sign of just how desperate the movie is that its lead character is Heather's brother, who after 20 years has decided to go back to the woods to look for her. Some newly discovered found footage gives him hope, making you wonder how closely he actually bothered to watch the first film. Come to think of it, if this movie is set in a world where the events portrayed in the first movie really happened, then where does that leave the Book of Shadows? Did the filmmakers want to plan a follow-up to that as well, where even more people go back into the woods for no reason? Blair Witch is essentially the 2016 remix version of the original, full of characters that run away screaming "what was that?" or stand around calling each other's names. It can't properly call itself a sequel because it follows pretty much the exact same plot and shares its actual ending with the original. Our new cast eventually discover the house from the first film, and I think you can guess what happens next. It's just lazy. And with that, we've reached the end of this list of 9 promising horror movies that totally sucked. There are so many more out there that we could have put on this list, so let us know what you would have included in the comments down below. And remember to check out whatculture.com for more lists and articles like this every single day. As always, I've been Amy from What Culture, and I'll catch you next time.